Okay.
Okay.
As a start, first of all, can you just say and spell your name, please?
Sure. My name is Marcy Kaufman, Marcy Kaufman.
Great. And to start, if you could just give me an autobiographical sketch of your own travels and engagements in the world of higher education, and you can be as elaborate as you'd like.
Okay. I did not go to college right out of high school. I ended up getting a job, and I went to something called weekend college at Marymount College in Tarrytown for several years, working toward a bachelor's in business, because my company would help me pay for a bachelor's in business. Then I got pregnant with my daughter, so I stopped going to school. And after my mom died, I went back to school as an adult student and got a bachelor's degree in English in 2000 at the ripe old age of 40 at Quinnipiac University. And I've now worked at Yale University for just over, not quite 12 years. And I'm currently the graduate registrar in the history department at Yale.
Okay.
I've also worked in the economics department and for the Yale Center for Public Health Preparedness, which was part of epidemiology and public health.
Okay. And always in this kind of administrative, program administrator kinds of roles, or?
I did faculty support for economics, where I did a lot of typing of papers on the Indian economy, so I know more about the Indian economy than I ever expected to know. In the epidemiology in the Yale Center for Public Health Preparedness, I was the only administrative staff member, so I did everything. I did grants, I did expenses, I did office supplies, I did everything. And then when I came to the history department, now my role is just administering the graduate program.
Okay. And in that role, can you say a little bit about, the kind of work that you do for the department, but also the particular angle of vision that it gives you on the university as a kind of wider enterprise?
The work that I do for the history department, I support the director of graduate studies, who is the faculty member. It's a rotating position every 2 years, but the faculty member is responsible for directing the graduate program. Last year we made some changes to our graduate program requirements. The DGS was the person who made those decisions in consultation with the faculty and a faculty vote, but I'm the person who's responsible for understanding what those administrative and academic requirements are and tracking the students' progress through them. So I have to have a good understanding of those. I also advise the students on what they should be doing, when they should be doing it. If they have problems, I understand what possible solutions there are, and I have relationships with the deans and other administrators at the university, so I know who to reach out to get those problems solved. Because of that role and my contacts with other people at the university, I do have, I think, a broad understanding of the university, and I understand the challenges and some of the things that Yale insists must continue to happen even though they don't make sense from an administrative, a practical, or a pedagogical point of view. And so I really think that my work with other Yale entities and administrators gives me that particular view. I also work directly with the graduate students, and I hear from them what challenges they face because of university regulations or restrictions. And so.
Okay. So what are some of the things, I guess, let's think about a few different categories. What are some of the things that you think seem to run pretty well? What are some of the things that seem, well, you already alluded to things that might not be running so well. What are some of those? And also, if you could talk, I mean, you've been here 14-ish years.
No,
now.
12.
12 years, okay. But if you've noted any changes during that time, I'd love to hear about that as well.
Yeah. I've been here for 12 years, and it's not the same university that I came to in 2002. There have been quite a number of changes, and a lot of those have to do with the corporatization of higher education, which I understand from what I've read is a trend throughout the industry, which I find just even that term problematic to call higher education an industry. It just seems to be much more about money and less about the stated mission of the university, which is teaching, research, and scholarship. And I find that to be very problematic.
So how are those changes reflected in your day-to-day work in this office, but also how do you see it reflected in student experience?
Well, I see it reflected in student experience in the rush to degree. There's a lot of pressure on students to finish and finish quickly. That limits their ability to do the kind of work that they came here to do. I think that there's more emphasis from the administration's point of view on the financial pieces of it rather than the quality of the scholarship. And I know that the students find that frustrating. It's also extremely stressful for them that they have 5 years of guaranteed funding in a purportedly 6-year program, when actually our average time to degree in our department is 7+ years. So there are 2 years of funding that's not set in stone. It's not guaranteed to them. Most do all right, but when you have a 7th year and you don't know if you're going to be able to teach, and you don't know if the undergrads are going to take the course you've been assigned to, and you might lose your job 3 weeks into the term, how do you pay your rent? How do you eat? And how do you do that and finish your dissertation at the same time? So I find that tremendously problematic and very much a stress on the students. From my point of view, in our program, there has increased pressure. Cut the budget, cut the budget, cut the budget. And we are coming off 5 years of budget cuts across the board in the university. We have students who need to come here to visit if they're admitted students. So we want to recruit them. We want to woo them. We want them to come to Yale. And there's a lot of pressure on how much can we reimburse them for their travel? How much can we spend on the lunch or the dinner or whatever? And we do very, very well, I think, relatively speaking. But it just seems counterproductive to me that you want to recruit the cream of the crop to the university, but yet you want to cut how much you spend on doing that. There's a balance to be achieved, and I think that we're tipping on the wrong side of that balance.
So in budgetary terms, there's a kind of culture of constriction. Has there been reorganization across the university during this period that has also affected not just the work that you do, but the overall kind of operations that you're involved in? There
has been tremendous restructuring of work at the university. They brought into place the shared services model, which, in my opinion, has been a disaster, both from the point of view, they brought it in with the intent, or the stated intent, of making things more efficient and more cost effective. I think it's had the opposite effect.
Can you first of all just describe what shared services means?
Shared services is where they centralize work. We always have done in the department our own expense reports, we used to send invoices to the accounts payable department, both payroll, accounts payable, expense reimbursement. All these financial transactions are now housed in the Shared Services Center at 344 Winchester. But what was not taken into account when they put that model in place is that the faculty, who are the people who incur these expenses, who direct these programs that require accounts to be paid, deal with the people in their departments. So the people in the departments are still having to deal with these transactions in a different way, and then they have to be handled at Yale Shared Services. So to me, it's double the work. It's not an efficiency. I believe that the objective of it is truly surveillance and control of the finances. They took the research accounts away from the departments not long ago and put them at the Macmillan Center, which is the Yale Center for International and Area Studies, because that's all centralized and they can keep track of who has what money and how it's being used. So I don't find that to be efficient. I find that to be surveillance. The other thing that has happened to me particularly and my colleagues in departmental registration jobs is that a lot of tasks that were done elsewhere before are now falling to us. Teaching fellows, you asked before about what does not work very well. Teaching fellows is one of the most nightmarish, inefficient, ridiculous systems that I have ever come across in my life. And it used to be with teaching fellows that we would select who was going to teach for which class, we would prepare letters and take them down to the teaching fellow office. We now have to request all of our allocations in an electronic system. The teaching fellow office has to approve them or request revision. Then they send some electronic something to the students once we've assigned the students. The students have to be both entered, submitted, approved by the DGS, approved by the student's DGS if they're from another department, and by the teaching fellow office if they're not in their teaching years. So that has to happen. And that's a lot of work that used to be done in the teaching fellow office that now I do. The other thing that used to happen in the registrar's office is that the sections used to be set up in the registrar's office. We now have, as a part of this electronic system, section management. So I set up the sections. I assign the students to which days and times. When sections have to be switched, I have to cancel the section and create a new section. It's a tremendous, tremendous amount of work.
So in a department like this, we're talking about how many courses with how many discussion sections?
I usually place between 50 and 60 teaching fellows each term. It's probably about 30 courses per term, maybe between 25 and 30. This particular term, we have 3 blockbuster courses, one of which has 27 sections. But because of the timing of the undergrads availability and the teaching fellows availability, I have had to cancel and move. I think there are 40 sections that have been created for that one class.
That sounds like a full-time job right there.
It basically is a full-time job from the week before the term starts through at least the 3rd week of classes, and I was still dealing with some teaching fellow section questions today. And we're well into the term.
The shared services change you attribute to a kind of surveillance model over the budget I guess on the part of the provost office. Is that
on the part of the administration?
The they in this picture.
The they in that picture is the provost office, the vice president of finance and administration.
Okay. Now the teaching fellow system. How do you account for that change to the system? Is that just a love of the new software technologies, or is there some better reason, or at least better intention there?
I don't think it was a better intention. I think it was an intention to save money. Because in the old system, they did not know as early in the term as they do now who was teaching which section and how many students were enrolled in each section. They also changed about 4 years ago, I believe it was, that they made a minimum section enrollment requirement. So now each section must have 6 students or the section is automatically canceled. It used to be that if you had somebody in a section and say there were 5 students or whatever, they wouldn't know until the 3rd or 4th week of the term, and by then the faculty member could go back and say, pedagogically, it's unsound for me now to try and change this. And they would accept that. But it costs more money because we have to hire people from, if we don't have enough graduate students in the department or in the graduate school who are qualified to teach a course, we hire professional school students, or we hire MA students from like Global Affairs or some other MA program, and that costs them money. The teaching requirement, it's going to cost them one way or the other. But these additional people, these non-teaching year people, these professional school people, cost the graduate school money, and they wanted to cut that. I believe that's what they did, why they did it.
So whenever, there hasn't been one in a while, but every time there's been a strike cycle here at Yale, one of the phrases that you hear a lot is the kind of sacred status of quality of instruction. But what you're describing is systemic changes that have completely sacrificed quality of instruction. Is that a shift? Is that a change since the time that you've been here, or has that been that way all along?
I believe it's a shift since I came here, and I can attribute my perception of that shift to the hiring of Shauna King as the Vice President of Finance and Administration. When she came in with this her experience before this was for Frito-Lay, which is a manufacturing environment. And you can count how many bags of chips that you send out. You can count how many come back for quality assurance problems. But you can't do that with higher education. You can't quantify in that same way the work that's being done here. And I believe that she brought that manufacturing mentality to Yale, and that has created a lot of these changes.
And that her arrival more or less coincided with the crash as well, correct?
She was here just before the crash, and then.
But from where you sit, these changes predated the crash? Or
Yes, they were talking about doing something before the crash that was going to be called Yale Next, and that was a program of there were all sorts of talk about, everybody's going to have to dress more professionally, more corporate. It was very much a corporatization trend. When the crash happened, they didn't have the money to move forward with it all. So these other changes happened instead of Yale Next. I do believe that Yale Next would have taken us in the same direction, perhaps not in the same format, but I do believe that was the intention.
And so, well, there are all kinds of questions that come tumbling out of that. One is kind of how would you describe the morale in your kind of middle stratum of the university between the upper administration on one side and students on the other?
Morale is horrible. They have been getting rid of positions through attrition, through layoffs. Everyone is doing more work. And it's very stressful, and the constant refrain is you can't have overtime, you can't have calm time, but people feel very dedicated to the people that they serve here, the students, the faculty, the deans. So people work through their lunch hours, or they stay late without getting paid because they want the work to be done and they want it to be quality work. And that's very demoralizing for your employer to sort of devalue what you do and just assume that you can just continue to take on unlimited amounts of work, and that you will, because in their words, you're lucky to have a job.
Now, this is, there have been all kinds of articles recently about how this is happening throughout the economy. I mean, the impossible scheduling at a place like Walmart or Starbucks. So I guess, I don't even know how to turn that into a question other than to ask, so what does that say to you about the university as a place of kind of former idealism? How different is it to work in a university under these conditions than it might have been a generation ago? Or what's your understanding of employment within the university system?
Well, a generation ago, women made 59 cents on the dollar, which is why Local 34 was formed. So I don't think that there was a whole lot of respect for our work then. I think that with the formation of Local 34 at this university, that was a transformative process, and I do believe that people did come to understand the value of the work that we do. Whether the administration ever understood that, I don't know. It's in their interest to sort of squash that, because the more they squash that, the less value they ascribe to us and the less they feel we're entitled to. I worked in the corporate world for many years, and it was just a total. When I first came to Yale, I said Yale is its own bizarre little insular world, but with this corporatization trend, it's profits before people instead of people before profits. And what we do here is a people-oriented thing. Knowledge and scholarship, that is for humanity. That is not for profit. And they're trying to make it be much more about the profit, growing the endowment as quickly as possible at any cost. That's what I find very, very disturbing.
Now, so you mentioned Shauna King from the corporate world. There are other people in administration who are more from that world than from the world of the academy. From your office, how clear a view do you get of that kind of struggle between educators and non-educators within the structures of Yale?
From my office, I have, I think, a fairly good view of that because I work directly with faculty and students. I also have a very good view of that through my work for Local 34 because I have contact with some of those other people. I go to a regular meeting, it's called the Yale Shared Services Steering Committee, It's a joint university union committee where we theoretically talk about changes and things that are coming down the line, and problems with those. And that has a lot of managerial, vice president level people involved in it. So I see some of those players.
Can you characterize those discussions?
Well, yes. The committee was formed a few summers ago. They had these meetings where they told C&Ts that they needed to come to one of these 3 mandatory meetings, and I went to one. It wasn't, our department was not affected.
I'm sorry, C&T for those who don't know.
C&T, clerical and technical workers at Yale. And certain departments were involved in this, and there was a meeting where I went as a Local 34 representative to represent my coworkers who were also at the table. And there were 7 managers present, high-level managers. And basically they said, we're going to give you this activity assessment tool, and you're going to fill it out in a 1-hour appointment with HR, telling us what you do and how much time you spend doing it. And then we will evaluate the work and decide what to take away from you. And you will be then subject to a reduction in hours or layoffs. And it was the most disrespectful, threatening meeting I had ever been present in. So after we had those meetings, I told the coworkers, do not do this. The union is going to push back on this. So we had a meeting with Ernie Huff, who is the vice president or associate vice president of Student Financial and Administrative Services, Julie Grant, who is higher, I believe she's somewhere in business operations, high level in business operations, Ron Colbash, who's the assistant vice president of the Shared Services Center. And it was myself, Pam O'Donnell, who's the vice president of Local 34, Ann DeLauro from the Italian department, who's also on the executive board, Lori Kennington, who's the president of Local 34, and there may have been one other person, I can't remember. But basically we told them that no, we're not going to do this. This is unacceptable. And they also said it had to be done within a week. We said, no, we're going to stretch that out over a few months so people can do a thorough job and really think about what they do. And we're going to let them put supplemental materials with it. And as a result of our pushback at that meeting, that's when the Shared Services Steering Committee was formed, so that we could discuss these issues and not just have suddenly a meeting where these workers are threatened by the university.
And has that turned out to be a group that has real teeth?
Not lately. It did have real teeth at the beginning because they were afraid, because we were having actions and we were speaking out and we were pushing back. As things quieted down and as we went through the contract negotiations,
and this is also the crashes in the background of all of this.
The crashes in the background of all of this, because the reason that what we really pushed back on, there was that meeting, and that's this committee came out of that meeting. But before that, there had been a rash of people who retired from the university. A lot of high-level C&T administrative people, registrars, E-level, which is the highest level in clerical and technical work, E-level people retiring because they were disgusted with the direction the university was going in. Actually, Maureen Dracchio, she had been in NELC, Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations, for 52 years. And she retired and wrote a letter to Rick Levin and told him that the reason she was retiring was because she was so disturbed by the direction the university was going. So when all those people were retiring, and there were probably 10 of them, the university said, we are going to replace those people with 6-month duration, 10-month per year C-level employees. So the E-level jobs, which we had fought for in the 80s and won, or maybe they might have been part of the 2003 contract, but we had fought for the E-level position, and they were just totally diluting that, removing the advancement opportunities for a lot of C&Ts, and these are the best jobs at the university. The work is high level, the work is diverse, there's a lot of responsibility, so this is something that people aspire to, and the university was just denigrating that by saying, we really don't need you. We can do this with much lower level people who are not even here all year. And if they don't work out, we'll just get rid of them in 6 months. So it was really very, very disrespectful and very threatening. We pushed back on that. The university agreed to make them D-level people and let them decide if they wanted to be 11-month or 12-month employees. Most of them took 12-month because you can't live on an 11-month salary.
You have to eat for 12
months. You have
months.
to eat in July, whether you're working or not. So that part we did move a little bit back. We did gain some of that back. But what they have done was they took the financial pieces away from those jobs. There are now floating business operations people who do that work.
The budget oversight and
processing of things. But the people in the offices still have to get the receipts and organize it before it gets passed along. So they really could be doing it themselves, and they really should be able to do it themselves. But again, that takes away department autonomy when they take that work away, and then they have that additional surveillance.
So one of the things, well, I want to come back to the surveillance in a second, but first, one of the things that they were promising at that juncture was that they were going to make training available during some of those summer months, what they were calling off months, and make it possible for people to pick up skills and maybe move up or make lateral moves that would be interesting to them. Has that been a promise that's been kept?
That's been a promise that's been kept because Local 34 is doing it. We have established the summer training program. Kathy Vellucci, who is a business ops manager at Yale, who was very instrumental in starting this program. In the first summer, there were 13 people who were told they had to do it. It was mandatory for them. And I guess the training was very limited and not particularly helpful. We came together the next year and put together a whole other realm of courses. We have financial operations module, there's a registrar's office module, shared services offers a module so people can learn how that center works. Just a whole lot of different opportunities, and it went from 13 people the first year to 300 people the next year. This past year, we had 10 modules, I believe, and over 1,000 people participated. So it's a collaborative group with Local 34 and management working together. Of course, budget is always an issue, trying to get money to pay people to do this. A lot of the training is delivered by C&Ts to C&Ts. I give an event planning training along with my colleagues, 2 other colleagues in the graduate school. I gave a public speaking training in conjunction with Kathy Vellucci this summer. A lot of the training happens because the C&Ts move it. I was in charge of business writing and interviewing skills and resume writing, but the teacher for that is a faculty member at Boston College, and she gets paid. So getting enough money to offer enough classes so that people could take advantage of that was a challenge, but the university did come through in the end to support it.
And how would you characterize the state of the unions at Yale right now?
I would say the state of the unions at Yale is...
Actually, you were here for the 2003 strike cycle.
I was here for the 2003 strike.
So can you give me the whole trajectory of 2003 to now?
Well, I had just gotten to the university in December of 2002. My husband had been laid off in February of 2003, and they went on strike in March of 2003. So I was a scab because I had to pay my mortgage. And I really did not understand the union at the time. I'd never been in a union. I was pretty ambivalent about it. Obviously, I've gotten very involved since that time. So I can really only speak to my experiences since I got involved in the union, which is since I came to the history department. And it's hard for me to say the trajectory. In the last contract, I think it was the 2003 contract, they put best practices into place. And best practices I thought was a wonderful idea, it is not as wonderful in practice as it is in theory.
So what was the thing you thought it was going to mean, and what is the thing that's turned out to mean?
I thought it was going to mean a better collaborative relationship between the university administration and the union administration. What it has come to mean to me is a way for the university to weasel out of things, to sort of shift the blame for things back onto the unions. Oh, you delivered a petition, but you didn't let us know in advance. That's not really a best practices way to be. We still have a huge problem in the graduate school in the staff being reduced by 50% over the past 7 years. And suddenly one day over this past summer, the staff were told they were going to be changing offices, that they were going to create a customer service center in part of the graduate school, and people were going to be moved out of their offices and put in joint offices down in one area of the graduate school with no plan in place, no input from the staff, and no one was able to explain the rationale and how this would be a benefit to the services provided. So we started pushing back on that, and we got best practices involved in that process. And honestly, it wasn't helpful. I don't believe it was helpful. It's called interest-based problem solving. That's the method where you put your interests on the table. You talk about the problem. You say, my interest is this, this, and this. The other side puts their interests on the table, and then you supposedly negotiate to figure out a solution that works for both parties. But that did not happen. The graduate school insisted that this had to go forward, that it had to happen within a certain time frame. It ended up not happening. They just dropped it, I think, because the employees were so unhappy about it and no one was able to explain the plan. But the person from Best Practices said, we have to have a conversation about staffing. And I said, we've been having conversations about staffing for 3 years. And she was not aware of those. The graduate school hasn't responded to those, so in my opinion, it just drags things out. It doesn't solve problems.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but this was all in the context of your general characterization of the state of the unions and
the state of the unions is heating up, I believe. Meaning that there's a huge fight in dining services for Local 35. They have centralized, again, shared services model, centralized cold food prep at 344 Winchester so that there are no more pantry workers in the residential colleges.
So all 12 colleges are getting cold foods from the same place?
From the same place. So if you have a huge influx of students one day that you don't expect and you run out of food, there's no food at the residential college to replace it with. They're preparing the food 2 and 3 days in advance, bagging it up, and trucking it over. So rather than having freshly prepared food that has been prepared at the college on the day it is served, that's no longer the model. They've moved the bake shop from Commons to 344 Winchester. Pantry workers, who were the lead dining workers in the residential colleges, have had their jobs totally changed and with no input. Local 35 has filed a complaint against the university with the National Labor Relations Board. 34's contract, their contract is being disregarded. This custodial staff has been cut by some astronomical number of people. They have a no layoff clause, but they just don't replace people when people leave. We have subcontractors cleaning in this building on a regular basis.
And where are they coming from?
From an outside firm. Some of the people who work for them are undocumented, so who knows what they make, who knows how they're treated, who knows what workload they have. But they can do it cheaper that way because they don't have to pay a living wage and they don't have to pay for benefits. Local 34's contract is under threat because of the reduction in staff through attrition, the erosion of our E-level positions, and we're gearing up to push back on the university for that. GSO, which is the Graduate Employees and Student Organization, has been fighting for recognition for 20 years. With the NYU decision, where the graduate students at NYU were allowed to unionize and the UConn students are now union, now is the time that GSO is going to push forward to fight for recognition, and we're all going to do this in a collaborative way. We also support Local 217, which is hotel workers and food service workers in the area. The New Haven Public School cafeteria workers are 217 workers. And what was they tried a couple of years ago to take away their health benefits and sick days. They are the lowest paid workers in the city. They work 15 hours during the school year, and they make almost no money. And then they were being told that they would have to pay for their own health insurance, and that they were going to lose sick days. So a worker who's barely making it to begin with, if they're making it at all, is now going to come to the public school and serve your child food while they're sick. So we stand together with them. So,
can you talk more about, I mean, you've just begun to get into this much wider world of the relationship between the institution of Yale and the city of New Haven, which in many ways coincides exactly with the other kind of rifts that you're describing, having to do with administration versus the workers of Yale, who are the people of New Haven. Can you talk about the kinds of engagements that the union has gotten involved in that do have to do as much with the quality of life in New Haven as with the quality of work inside the institution, and also kind of your own view of town-gown relations in the time that you've been here?
Okay. We've done a lot of work with the community, and in our last contract, we have the jobs pipeline language that created New Haven Works, whereby the university, as one of the partners with New Haven Works, has agreed to hire a certain number of New Haven residents into jobs over the course of 4 years. I believe the hospital is one of those partners, as well as a number of other employers. So the union's wider goal is to bring people up out of poverty, to raise the standards of living in New Haven, and more broadly, unite here nationally. We want people to have access to good jobs, and a good job pays a living wage and gives you benefits so that you can support a family and live a reasonable life in the city of New Haven. Part of why it's difficult to have that kind of a life in New Haven is the tax rate. The mill rate is 41.5, which is a tremendous tax burden. And a lot of the reason that the tax burden is so high is Yale's tax-exempt status. The university has over $20 billion in an endowment, but yet it's a quote-unquote nonprofit. It had a 20-point-something% return on the endowment this past year. That is not nonprofit, if you ask me. The services that the university takes from the city of New Haven, they do contribute toward fire, but fire in New Haven is a first responder, so if any student gets sick or hurt, it doesn't have to be a fire. The fire department has to respond. Yale has its own police force, but it also uses police services from the city of New Haven. The streets are all used by Yale and Yale people. The city has a huge influx of people every day who come into Yale to study, to teach, to work. And in my opinion, they do not contribute what they need to contribute to be what I would consider a good community member. Town-gown relations depends on who you talk to. If you talk to Bruce Alexander, town-gown relations are fabulous. Yale is a wonderful boon to the city of New Haven. If you talk to the people who live in New Haven, some of them do agree that Yale is a great part of the community. Yale is responsible for some of the businesses in the community, why they're here, but I don't believe, my personal opinion is that Yale does not contribute adequately for what it takes. And as Yale grows, Yale owns the golden circle at the inside of the city. And as Yale grows, and that circle expands, it pushes the residents further and further to the periphery of the city. And I find that very problematic.
So you hinted at some kind of tax policy issues. Are there other sorts of policy interventions that, I mean, if you were queen of New Haven,
I would love to be queen.
I know you would.
I would be a benevolent
but
queen.
what are, I mean, just thinking through the kind of structural logic of the kinds of things that you're saying, what are some of the policy interventions that could improve, that could actually kind of use the might of an institution like Yale to improve the quality of life for the city of New Haven, but also what are the interventions you would recommend to enhance the quality of life within the university as well?
As far as the community is concerned, employment is the huge issue. The university should be advocating hiring of New Haven residents to work here, to work for their contractors and subcontractors and all of the vendors that they do business with. They should have some standard that the people we do business with hire from New Haven, hire from the community, and pay a decent wage. I think Yale could have tremendous impact in that because people want to do business with Yale. It has cachet. It raises their profile if they are a Yale vendor. So I think the university could very easily do that. And would it cost them? It would cost them only in terms of whatever that did for the pricing of whatever it is that they're buying. But overall, it would benefit the city tremendously because more people would be self-supporting and more people would be becoming taxpayers. So that would be a tremendous boon. In terms of life within the university, I have long felt that this university has the intellectual, the financial, and the human resources to be a model of positive labor relations, and they chooses not to do so. Yale has a terrible reputation when it comes to labor relations. It is known as a union-busting institution, and it tries. And wouldn't it just be better for everybody if they tried to go on the positive direction instead of the negative direction? I think everybody would be happier. I don't think people are asking for things that are unreasonable. I don't think they would ask for things that are unreasonable. But it's a power. I think it's a power issue. Mm-hmm. For the students, less focus on money and the cost, what they cost the university, and more focus on the scholarship and what they give to humanity. So.
Adhere to the mission, that's what you're saying.
Huh?
Adhere to the mission.
Yes, exactly. Adhere to the stated mission, not the covert mission. The covert mission is grow the endowment as quickly as possible at whatever cost.
So when thinking about, one of the things that's fascinating about the politics of a university, and this really comes out around the strike cycles, which, it's been relatively quiet here for a number of years, mm-hmm. but there are many very different constituencies with very different interests, and it's mm-hmm. easy to lose sight of that. Students are one group, graduate students, C&T workers, the 35 workers, faculty, which itself you could divide into several different mm-hmm. tiers, mm-hmm. And then administration is itself probably mm-hmm. several different tiers. Mm-hmm. Within that context, I guess I'm curious about how you see the alignment of interests around these questions. Like what are the groups that seem like natural allies to you, and what are the groups that seem like the ones that you're always pushing against? Or does it even look that way to you from where you sit? Are those the terms that you would...
We should all be natural allies, the way I see it. In an ideal world, we would all be allies. It doesn't actually happen that way. But I do see the people who work for the university, local 35 workers, local 34 workers, graduate students, faculty members, whoever works here is a natural ally. We all are employed by Yale University, whatever kind of work we do. Local 35, they do plumbing, they do painting, they do cleaning, they do food prep, they do all kinds of different work, but they are a unit. C&Ts do completely different work. I do this administrative work. My friend does something in dermatopathology where she grows skin for grafts. I mean, there's a wide variety of work. Graduate students teach, and they research, and they do scholarship, which is why they came here, which is what the faculty do as well. And so I think that that is an absolutely natural collaboration. Again, it's the power dynamic that sort of impacts that. I would love to be an ally with the administration, but the administration would have to be pursuing the mission, the actual mission of the university, and doing it in such a way that everyone here was treated fairly. So.
Well, thank you so much for this. Is there anything we haven't talked about that we should have?
Not that I can think of.
Covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Very welcome. Very welcome. Very welcome. Very welcome.